guys, for the table this week, we are going to be picking back up in Luke chapter 7. And while we're in Luke chapter 7, we're going to be looking at how Jesus uses the table as a place of community and hospitality for those around him. So, when I think about hospitality, I think about my time in undergrad at Lipscomb. While I was there, I was part of a Bible study that was for the female Bible majors, and the lady who led our study was Miss Julie. Miss Julie was the absolute best. She still is the absolute best. But she was a home away from home for us. She always had a little corner in her office just for us girls that we can come in, relax. We could tell her about our day, and she was always willing to set everything down in her schedule just to give us her ear. She also would cook us lunch every Tuesday. There was always baked goods and coffee and tea in her office, and so she truly was the embodiment of hospitality. And I will never forget one of the stories that she told us about her own journey in hospitality. She was a new mom. Her husband was a preacher at the time, and they were hosting a small group at her house. But they were late to church. She couldn't get the kids out of bed on time. She didn't get to clean that morning. And so after church, her home was still a wreck. There were dirty dishes in the sink, toys all over the floor. She hadn't vacuumed. Her house was just a mess. It had been lived in. So she was convinced that she just needed to cancel small groups for that afternoon, that people couldn't come over and see her home in that state. But she just felt like she had to do it anyways. And so she was mortified for her friends to see her house like this. But when she had small group, there was a new mom there who had been visiting church for the first time after a long time. And she thanked Miss Julie for the state of her home. She said that church had always felt like a place where everyone was perfect and trying to appear like they had it all together. And so this simple act of being invited into a home that was a little bit messy showed the real and authenticness of a community centered on Christ. And so Miss Julie taught us that community and hospitality isn't about having a clean home. It's not about the perfect food, but that hospitality is always people-focused. That we don't have to have it all together, but we do have to be authentic and sincere with our love and our grace. And so as we look to Luke chapter 7, I think that's the same message that we see from Jesus. So as I was looking in this book, the book that Chris mentioned last week that we're reading together, the author starts off this chapter with a little imagination exercise. So I'm going to invite you to do the same thing. So just imagine that this scenario is taking place in your home, that you are here. So just pay attention to what the story looks and feels like for you. So imagine you're at a dinner party, and this host is a respectable church leader, and the guest of honor is a visiting preacher. And you are so excited to get to sit at a table with this preacher. You've heard about him. He's been making quite the stir in the community, and somewhat nothing to do with him at all, but you are just excited to have an opportunity to see what he's really like. So you're at this house, people are mingling, and then another guest walks in, and all eyes just immediately turn to her. This woman is wearing a tight-fitting, low-cut shirt and a skirt that is way too short. She's in stilettos, and her makeup is over the top, and she appears to already have a few drinks in her. The guests are mortified. The hosts don't know what to do. And then she goes straight for this visiting preacher. She starts rubbing his shoulders, and you see her whisper something into his ear. But as she stands up, you notice that her mascara is running down her face because she's been crying. So, let's talk about the story for a second. It's uncomfortable. When I first read this intro to this chapter, I was like, there's no way I can include this in my lesson. It is way too suggestive. This story, it's a lot. If it was happening in real life, if it was a real dinner party that I was at, I can guarantee you that that woman probably would have been asked to leave, that she probably would have gotten a lecture for her wardrobe, and she probably would have been berated for an inappropriate touch. This is all around just an uncomfortable situation. But Luke tells a very similar story like this in chapter 7. So before we go any further, let's read this story together. One of the Pharisees asked him to eat with him, and he went into the Pharisee's house and took his place at the table. And behold, a woman of the city, who was a sinner, when she learned that he was reclining at the table in the Pharisee's house, brought an alabaster flask of ointment. And standing behind him at his feet, weeping, she began to wet his feet with her tears and wiped them with her hair. And she kissed his feet and anointed them with ointment. Now when the Pharisee who had invited him saw this, he said to himself, if this man were a prophet, he would have known who and what sort of woman this is touching him, for she is a sinner. This story doesn't seem all that different from ours, does it? So let me just set the scene of Jesus' culture for you, of what this would have looked like for him. So they were at the Pharisee's house. The Pharisee probably would have had a larger home in the community, and they probably would have been outside in the courtyard. So houses would have had this outdoor atrium space where the community could walk by, see what was going on inside, and oftentimes the poor would hang around these courtyards of the rich people in the community, waiting for the leftovers of their meal. So it very well could have been that this woman just slipped in off the streets, that she was just walking by, saw Jesus there, and just went straight for him. And so she starts washing his feet, and she's weeping, and she lets her hair down to rub the oil. And this scene, it's so uncomfortable for their culture. I've heard this before, but this author reminded me that a woman letting her hair down like that in public would have been on par, would have been the same liking to a woman in our culture showing up topless to a dinner. It is uncomfortable. It's inappropriate. Jesus should have done something, but he doesn't. So the author says, everything about this woman is wrong. She does not belong here, and the actions she performs are inappropriate for any setting for someone like Jesus. But Jesus doesn't stop her. Jesus recognizes her actions as a real thing. He interprets what she does as a loving act rather than an exotic one. And so this author continues to say that Luke picks these dramatic stories of these characters of tax collectors and prostitutes when he's talking about Jesus to almost like test us. He's saying, like, have we really grasped God's grace? How do we react when a promiscuous woman kisses the body of Jesus? Do we celebrate God's grace, or are we scandalized? The grace of God turns out to be uncomfortable and embarrassing. Jesus is socially disruptive. His radical grace disrupts social situations, and we don't like the church to be disrupted. But involvement with people, especially the marginalized, begins with a grasp of God's good grace. So when we talk about hospitality, it's not about making sure that the tasks are complete. It's not about making sure the house is clean, the food is prepared. Hospitality is people-focused. And Jesus shows us that community, that hospitality is all about welcoming and creating space and paying attention and providing. So Jesus is gathered around the table with everyone. He welcomes everyone just as they are. So we can learn from Jesus, and we learn from being at the table that we're to come together as real people with real problems and real messes and real quirks, because Jesus' table invites us to give up the ways that we judge others and instead pay attention to the love that was carried out on the cross with all of its brokenness. So as we end, I want to leave you with one more quote from our book. The author says, "In our culture, shared meals offer a moment of grace, a sign of something different. It's a pointer of God's coming world. Life in the kingdom demands that we adopt a new set of table manners. And so we observe this etiquette and we become increasingly civilized according to the codes of the city of God. And around the table, we offer friendship and we celebrate life. Our meals offer a divine moment, an opportunity for people to be seduced by the grace of a better life, a truer life, and a more human existence." And friends, I've seen you do this. I've seen you offer hospitality and create community. I think back to our weeks at Camp Barnabas, and I know that those weeks were hard and they were uncomfortable. But I've never seen love embodied more so than I have seen you guys work at Camp Barnabas. You loved those campers. You put them first in every sense of the way. And I remember sitting around tables and just thinking, this cabin is a family. There is grace and there is love and there is joy. And it really was like the kingdom of God becoming a reality on earth. And I also think back to Sur City last year. I remember the shock and awe and a little bit of fear when I told you that every day we were going to be sharing a meal with our homeless friends. And at first it was really uncomfortable and it was really awkward. And some of you are probably thinking, what have we gotten ourselves into? And some of our homeless friends probably shared a little bit of uncomfortable stories too. By the end of that week, you knew their names, you knew their story, you knew what brought them life, you knew their pain, and there was a place in your heart for them. Because that's true community. That is a place where grace and love and authenticity is brought to a table and Jesus is there. So I thank you guys for the way that you have shown me how to be more hospitable, for the ways that you have shown me to create community. And so I'm sad that we're going to miss out on these community building moments this summer that we're used to, but I'm still excited to see how the Spirit is going to lead us into different ways, more creative ways to embody God's grace together. So I want you to remember that as Jesus invites us to the table, and as we invite other people to the table, that there has to be an abundance of grace and authentic and sincere love, because that's when God's future kingdom is going to break into the present, and it's going to be so, so, so beautiful. So this video is going to end, and there's going to be some discussion questions for your family up for you guys to talk through together. And my prayer for you this week is that your table will be a place that offers hope and grace and love for our community. So see you next week.